And we were talking about Elon Musk and
Yeah.
his possible takeover of Twitter. Can you share your thoughts with our audience?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would be very excited if he took it over. Look, he's a free speech proponent. There are a lot of super, politically correct things that have been going on in the U.S. and filtering out elsewhere. Some people are afraid to speak their mind. That probably isn't, I don't know, that's probably not a great way for society to grow and flourish. Um, that being said, there have to be some lines and parameters. There is obvious and blatant, hate speech. There are people who are completely unhinged and out of control. Um, you know, I don't think Elon Musk represents those people. I think he represents, free and orderly debate. And you had, was it Mark Andreessen, who also came out on Twitter and supported it. I think you have a lot of people out there in the world who feel like debate has been squelched. Um, just fair and honest debate. And so Elon taking over Twitter would be the single best thing for it. I bet you, look, this guy, he is probably the greatest entrepreneur of our generation. I mean, probably. I mean, I thought he was a few years ago. I mean, he definitively is. And he's a little bit of a playful guy too. I mean, you can see he likes to have fun. He'd be a cool guy to hang out. I don't know him, but I mean, he would be certainly a fun guy, very smart. Why wouldn't we want him? Certainly as a shareholder, I don't own Twitter, but I'm just saying as a shareholder, the stock has been garbage for years. I guarantee you, he takes that thing over, it goes up 10 times.
Yeah, I believe so too.
He can turn it into money. It's worth, what is it, 40, 50 billion, and it makes no money. Imagine what that thing is worth with Elon behind it. He'll turn it into a money-making machine. But that's secondary. Secondary to the main point, which is, this is a new method, a new way to engage with people's ideas. And we didn't have this 20 years ago. We didn't have it, really even 10 years ago. This is a valid forum. And I think a lot of people believe that it's being controlled to a degree that isn't like, that I don't want to say isn't fair, but, that is too one-sided. And so to me, I think Elon is, a fair actor. And I think he knows how to turn things into money if the shareholders care. So I would, and he's also, look, he's my generation. Like, it's time for the 40-year-old, 50-year-old and under people to assume control of some of these things. And control, I just mean oversight, right? I think, and you see this also like the DAE versus the legacy world. I mean, it's a generational shift that's happening in front of our eyes.
And how do you see as well institutional sentiments? You discovered crypto in 2014, then you started your fund in 2019, and today is 2022. So how did the sentiment change, and how do you see the development of institutional investments into crypto?
Well, I mean, in 2014, I still think it was like a plaything for technologists. It was like a cool technological thing for the Silicon Valley guys. And I think what's happened is that as time has gone on, it's shown that it's super anti-fragile, right? I don't like, and it's a phrase I don't really like using, but I mean, it really has survived its travails through the wilderness. It's had plenty of opportunity to be attacked, to go down, to lose validity. And all that's happened is that it's continued to grow. Network effect has exploded. And I think larger pools of capital see this. Also, look, number go up, right? I mean, I think a lot of guys are sitting in that legacy world, sitting on bonds, you know, $200 trillion, earning zero or negative real yield. And they see these little group of guys over here, you know, in Bitcoin, Ethereum, even in Doge, you know, and making a lot of money. And so for me, I think it's the institutional money managers more than the corporate types you mentioned before that will be the next big push into it. I think corporations, you know, they have shareholders. They're very conservative. I mean, Saylor owns his own company. He does whatever he wants, right? It doesn't really work that way with sort of bigger, and he has a relatively small company with bigger companies. So the ones who, the asset allocators, you know, the big pools of capital, they should be next. And it started. I mean, look, I have 2 pension funds in my fund. You know, there aren't that many. But, you know, I'm very risk averse, so that helps them.
And can you share your portfolio companies in 10T and
Yeah.
your investment strategy, and which other companies do you consider to invest next?
Yeah, sure. Well, you can go on our website, 10tfund.com, and it's all there. We own 17 companies, 12 with valuations of over $1 billion. The other 5 are between 500 and $1 billion. In the first 2 funds, we had 3 buckets, 3 sectors that we invested in. There was blockchain technology, we had new next generation financial services, and then we had digital asset ecosystem gateways. And so we have 3 or 4 companies in each bucket. The portfolio, those first 2 funds were those, had 3 or 4 companies each bucket. The third fund that we have now is changed a little bit. We have a bucket for blockchain gaming, Metaverse, NFT businesses. Then we have next generation DAE businesses, then gateways, and then a DAE infrastructure bucket. So 4 buckets in the third fund. And again, 2 to 3 companies. We own, you know, we own companies like Kraken and Ledger and Deribit, Figure, Figment, Helium, Ledden, you know, Credo, Animoca. We just invested in Yuga, the Yuga Labs deal. So these are all companies broadly that are not venture bets, right? They're businesses, you know, that have a certain, you know, that are making a certain amount of money, and then fall into those buckets. And one of the reasons we chose those buckets is because we think that that best reflects, that gives the most diversified exposure to the whole ecosystem. So hitting companies in those buckets gives us that exposure. One thing I would say is we do look for CEOs who are good asset allocators. And so that's a very important part of this space because, you know, it's growing so quickly. Very often it's more important to see, you know, not what's developed today, but like what is developing and what will happen over the next 18, 24 months. And one of the good investments, one of the investments I really liked was in Gemini. And part of the reason is I think the Winklevi are excellent allocators of capital. I think it's now 3 years ago, they bought Nifty Gateway for, I think it was $1 million, right? And last year, I think they did over 70 million in revenue. Don't quote me on those numbers, but I think that's about right. So 3 years ago, they saw that this was an area that was going to grow. So a lot of the companies that we're investing in are what I think of as budding conglomerates, you know, and once you're making a certain amount of money, you know, you're not thinking about making the rent check or the payroll or whatever it is. You can look out into the future and make those bets, right? Those are very important. So we actually have an implied venture bet inside the companies, right? We're not investing in those little things, but those companies are the same thing for Animoca. I mean, Yat, the CEO, probably the most active CEO in the entire space. I mean, every single day there's an announcement that he's bought another company or bought another game. I think that Animoca is certainly the best, the best. Well, if I were only going to have one play on NFT, Metaverse, however you want to call it, for the next 5-6 years, that would be it. You know, I think he really is building a conglomerate. You know, and I think, you know, I look for those types of investments. Yeah.
And what is your general opinion on NFT and gaming space?
Well, I just invested in Animoca, so my opinion is good.
So do you consider it's like the entry for the wider audience into crypto world?
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. Look, there are 2 billion gamers in the world, and they have been living in a digital metaverse for years now, right? They understand digital value. It's very straightforward, very simple for them. So I think one of the reasons that NFTs have been growing so quickly and the adoption rate is so fast is that this group of people who are under 30 years old who have been playing video games in this gaming space, they don't need to be educated as to why a non-fungible token makes sense. Whereas explaining Bitcoin and how it works, the mechanism and network, and you know, explaining that to a 65-year-old guy who's managing $1 trillion, that's very hard. Very hard. And then if you say, okay, well, let me explain Ethereum to you, then forget it. I mean, it's a very complex thing, as opposed to, you know, value is something you can hold in your hand. The old guys always said they want to hold it. And what do you mean you can change the code? And what do you mean there are different cryptocurrencies? And what do you mean it's programmable? And what is this lightning thing? And how does that work? So it's impossible. I mean, not impossible. It's just very hard and takes time. And the younger group, through NFTs, I think once, you know, I think the adoption rate there is faster, but also once they're involved in the NFT space, they have a wallet, and the next thing you know, it is like, well, maybe I'll own some Ethereum, right? Or maybe I'll own some Bitcoin. So I think the entry, the barrier to entry gets reduced. Yeah.
Do you plan as well to invest into other funds?
No.
Okay. And so what's in your opinion needed for the mass adoption of cryptocurrency?
Well, I think we're seeing mass adoption now. I mean, it's education. It's people like you doing what you're doing. That's what's needed, right? Yeah. And so I think that's why I'm doing this. So why CZ does it, why everybody does it, because, you know, I don't really know why people, well, I sort of do know why people have been slow to adopt it. It is very complicated. It took me a long time. But you have to not give up. And I was fortunate I had the time to do it. And people who have their, you know, day jobs, they don't, you know, they get home, they're tired, they have other things they're focusing on. It's hard to really sort of dig deep. But I think it's easier now than ever because there are lots of good books out there. I love Jan Pritzker's book, Inventing Bitcoin. You have Safed Amos's book, The Bitcoin Standard. You have all kinds of, you know, and Antonopoulos has written some great books as well. So these guys, you didn't have that in 2014. Like people, it was hard to explain. It was hard to understand. So I think, you know, adoption has been, it will continue to be exponential. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it seems more and more. Thank you for such interesting conversation.
My pleasure.